Hi everyone, welcome to Learning Impact. In today's lecture, we will discuss global stratification. We will discuss its definition, some of its examples, and also theories of global stratification. So let's start. Okay, first is that what is global stratification? We have studied social stratification, and today's lecture is about global stratification. So social stratification, global stratification, both are not different from each other. Both are the social stratifications, but the social stratification is a stratification within a nation. It is that the people of the single nation, they have been stratified into different strata. But the global stratification is about stratifying the whole world, the whole globe into different stratum. So we can define the global stratification as the patterns of social inequality in the world as a whole. This is the global stratification. There is a patterns of social inequality means that the cultural value rewards have been unevenly distributed among the different nations of the world. So this social inequality in the world as a whole is called the global stratification. We can define social inequality as it refers to degree to which individuals, group, and categories they differ in their access to a cultural value rewards. Cultural value rewards, as we have discussed, that it was identified by Max Weber, that is the form of the property, power, and prestige. So how much a nation has access to a cultural value rewards, that determines their stratum in a whole ladder. And then the global stratification affects the chances of survival of a nation. As we have discussed in a social stratification, that it affects the chances of survival of an individual. But in case of the global, as we are talking about nations, so we will say that it affects the chances of survival of a nation, because either a nation is capable to compete in a global economy. It is all determined that where they have to place in a global strata. So we can say that if a nation is of least industrialized, of course they are unable to compete with the global economies, and they will lack access to a different resources. So we can say that global stratification actually determines the status of a nation, the placement of nation globally, and also determine their survival, that how much they are able to defend their nation as compared to others. Okay, then the examples of the global stratification. We can take two types of models to discuss the examples of global stratification. First is the three worlds model. Three worlds model is a model which was, it was on the basis of developing the whole world on the basis of level of development and the economic system. Economic system means that what kind of a system run the economy, like either it is a capitalist economy or it's a socialist economy, what kind of economic system prevail in a nation. And the level of development means that what either the industrialization is at peak, or either the nation is of least industrializing, or either they haven't passed to the industrialization year. So what is the extent, or we can say the degree of industrialization in a country, it will determine their level of development. So three worlds model actually consider these two factors while categorizing countries into different strata. So they categorize the whole globe into three stratum. That is the three worlds model was actually proposed after the World War II, and they classify the whole globe into three worlds. That is the first world, and the first world, on the basis of their economic system, it was the capitalist countries, and the level of development is that it is the most industrialized countries. And the it includes all the countries that are in capitalist and that are most industrialized. The second world include those countries which were the socialist with less industrialization, and the third world were the remaining nations. So it means that the whole globe was divided on the basis of level of development. Either they have been industrialized, or they have been less industrialized, or either they haven't passed through the industrialization. And the economic system, either they are capitalist economy, socialist economy, or is any other type of economy. So this was all about the three worlds model, from which this three worlds model we can take as an example of the global stratification. And remember that this three worlds model was something which was proposed after the World War II. So it means that it is not something, on the basis of their objective criteria of economic development. It was criticized, the three worlds model was criticized because it was believed that it is actually the result of the Cold War politics, in which the capitalist countries, which was one group at that time, they were face off with the socialist countries. They were at war with the socialist countries. So socialist countries who were at the second party, they were categorized as the second world. The capitalist world, which was the first group, which was categorized as the first world, and the other nations who didn't participate in a Cold War, they remained more or less on a sideline, so they were classified as the third world. It was criticized for the fact that this third world, which contain almost more than 100 countries, there are many countries that differ in their economic development than each other, but still they have been classified into single stratum. For example, the country Chile in South America, it has 30 times more per person productivity than the poorest country of the world, such as Liberia or West Africa. But still, West Africa, Liberia, Chile, they were classified in the third world because they were neither capitalist nor socialist, so they were just lumped together in a third world. This classification was actually criticized for lacking the unbiased criteria to classify the whole globe. Okay, then the other example is the income model. The model which we just discussed, which was the three worlds model, it was then modified into income model, and in this case there was then an objective criteria which was defined to divide the whole world. And what was that objective criteria? That they actually classify countries based on a gross national income per capita, GNI per capita. This gross national income can be defined as the dollar value of the country's final income in a year, which is divided by its population. So it was formally referred to as GNP. It is it stands for gross national income. It measures the total domestic and the foreign value which has been added to the it measures the total domestic and the foreign value added claimed by the residents at a given period in time, usually a year, expressed in current US dollars. So it is the dollar value of the country's final income in a year divided by its population. This is what GNI means. So in this model, there was then a kind of objective criteria to measure the level of development of a countries, and then they were classified accordingly. So the GNI, in case of the high-income countries, they were those countries whose GNI was greater than $15K dollars. The second middle-income countries were those whose gross national income was in between $4,000 to $15,000, and the low-income countries were those whose gross national income were less than $4,000. This was all the classification which was done on the basis of the gross national income. Okay, these high-income countries were the countries most of the life conditions in high-income countries, they were of high standard. Middle-income countries have almost the average life standard, and low-income countries mostly include those countries who have even don't have access to the clean water, means that they were living in a substandard condition. So the high-income countries were those in which the industrial revolution first took place. They were economically more productive. There were significant cultural differences that exist among the high-income countries. For example, Europe, which has about 30 official languages. So there are also a kind of multiculturalism in high-income countries, and also that they have a capital-intensive production. They have factories, they have industrial machinery and advanced computer technology, and also they control the world's financial market. They control the global economy, the financial activity. These countries affect the world throughout these countries affect the people throughout the world because they are the most industrialized countries of the world. And the middle income countries include those countries, they were mostly 46% population of the middle income countries were mostly rural, and these in which 54% they live in or near the cities. And also that most of the population, they are poor, they lack to schools they lack access to schools and also the medical care, and they don't have adequate housing, and even some of this population, they lack even the safe drinking water. Their population is dense as compared to the high income countries. And example of the income countries, middle income countries are mostly, for example, the Middle Eastern countries like Syria, and also the Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Georgia, Armenia. They were classified as the middle income countries. And the low income countries were those countries that were mostly agrarian, means that they hadn't passed through the industrialization yet. They were agrarian society with some industry, but most of the the major source of the economy was the agriculture. As population was dense, 1/3 of the world's population, they are farmers. And also that hunger, diseases, and unsafe housing is something common in the low-income countries. So examples of the low-income countries include Liberia, Central African nations. These are those nations that are least industrialized in the world, that are the low-income countries. So this is the income model which actually gave us, a relatively more scientific explanation of the global stratification as compared to a three worlds model. So these two are the examples of the global stratification. Okay, then the theories of global stratification. There are many theories which actually tend to understand that how did the world's nation become stratified. They tend to understand the origin of the global stratification, and also they tend to give a kind of different solutions to a suffering of hungry people in much of the world. Means that they try to give a solution, a more efficient solution to erase the global poverty. So this is how the theories of the global stratification deal with problems. We will discuss two types of theories in this lecture, that is the modernization theory and the dependency theory. Okay, first is the modernization theory. What is modernization theory? Modernization theory is a theory that actually considers some technological advancement, but as well as at the same time, it also considers some cultural differences among nations. And they give some kind of explanations to the affluence, to the accumulation of wealth, that how the wealth get accumulated around the globe after the Industrial Revolution. So modernization theory emerged in 1950s. And it was a time when the US society was fascinated by a new development in technology. So we can define modernization theory as a model of economic and social development that explains global inequality in terms of technological and the cultural differences between nations. That either in case of the technological progress, which nations has attained more progress and which country is lagging, and which country is leading in our technological race. And also they consider some cultural differences, that what is the culture of poverty that is actually inhibiting some nations to have more progress in a technological race. This is how they study the global stratification around the globe. Modernist theory favors structural functionalism approach. They believe that some role of the rich nations which they play in our society is something beneficial. It has a beneficial consequences in our society. We will discuss role of rich nations later on this lecture. And then it is affluence that demands an explanation. It means that they actually study the accumulation of wealth, and they believe that this accumulation of wealth, which we call affluence, it actually demands a kind of explanation. We have to explain this, that how the wealth is getting accumulated in some area, and also the sum of the other portion of the world is actually they are trapping in the poverty cycle. And also that it identified tradition as the greatest barrier to economic development. As we discussed, that modernization theory, it considered technology but also considered cultural differences. So we can say that modernization theory mostly believe that tradition act as a barrier to economic development. Means that there is some kind of traditional thoughts, traditional ideas which mostly adopted by the grandfather, they pass on it to their next generation, and in that way the whole generation, they trap into their traditional thoughts, and they try to avert the risk. They try to avoid the risk. So in that way they mostly stick to their tradition. So sometimes it is because that this is their culture that actually inhibit the nation to become more progressive. We will discuss example the theory of the Rostow stages of the modernization. It is as one of the example of the modernization theory. So this is how the modernization theory believe that the countries around the globe has been stratified. It is on the basis of their technology and also some cultural differences between nations. And he believed that the modernization theory believed that affluence that demands an explanation because it is the affluence which is the accumulation of wealth. It comes due to the trade expansion. The accumulation of wealth occurred due to the industrial revolution and also because of the rise of capitalism. And the modernization theory believed that with the industrial revolution, absolute poverty declined too much. And regarding the culture, the modernization theory believed that the culture environment, that is the tradition, it is required to emphasize the benefits of material wealth and new ideas. And the tradition is a kind of, inhibiting innovations and inhibiting new ideas. It will prove destructive for the society as a whole. So this is how some countries it lag in global stratification, and other countries they gain upper stratum in a global stratification. So we will take one of the example of the Rostow stages of the modernization. Okay, and regarding the tradition, the modernization theories of view that tradition act as a barrier to economic development. This modernization theory actually referring to the strong family system. Also, they are referring to reverence from the past discourse that mostly the generation they are stick to their forefather words. They mostly, they are mostly less confident to take a risk because they believe that if they had loss in that risk, it will lead to the loss of the necessities. It will cause a huge change in their standard of living. And also the customs and the religious beliefs. Modernization theorists believe that the religious belief make the person more fatalistic. It inhibits their courage, their motivation to work more and more harder. In fact, the fatalistic belief, it actually make them to believe that it is something determined by the God. They make them more fatalistic rather than to make them more self-centered and more motivative towards the hard work. Okay, so the Rostow stages of modernization is one of the theory which we will discuss in this modernization theory. Okay, here is the Rostow theory of the Rostow stages of the modernization. Okay, the Rostow stages of modernization, it actually help us to understand that how the society passed from tradition to a modern lifestyle. And the Rostow theory of modernization is a model that outlines the stages of economic development that a country passes through as it transitions from a traditional society to a more industrialized one. It gives a kind of pathway which the Rostow believed that every country has to follow in order to have to achieve a more industrialized end, in order to have more progressive end, they have to pass through these stages. This is also known as the Rostow stages of economic growth, and also Rostow was an American economist whose full name was the Walt Whitman Rostow, who actually proposed this theory in 1960s, and he gave his 5 stages of economic growth. What are his 5 stages of economic growth, and what does he mean by these 5 stages? Let's discuss. Okay, the Rostow stages of the economic growth, and we can say Rostow stages of modernization and economic development. Here are 5 stages which we will discuss. First stage is a traditional stage. In traditional stage, Rostow believed that it is the stage at which most of the societies are at primitive. They are at primitive level, and at this stage, most of the people they are farmers. There was once the barter system, which was based on the exchange of materials. Also, there was a small governing elite that actually controlled most of the resources. And also, there was low trade, or we can say no concept of trade. And most of the society was nomadic. They moved from one place to another in order to have more living conditions, and also to avoid the harsh weathers. And also that there was no infrastructure and less than 5% economic investment. Also, Rostow believed that at this stage the economic growth is almost less than 5%. And the population is too small. The population density is small because the population size is small, and most of the people they are involved in herding animals. It was a kind of hunting and gathering society. That was the society was at a traditional stage. So at traditional stage, what he believed that most of the people, they were honoring the past. They were living a life that was more spiritual. So they were giving least importance to material goods. And this traditional stage was then translated into a precondition for takeoff. Society then shift into a other stage, which was the second stage in his 5 stages of economic development, that is precondition for takeoff, which means that a kind of preparatory phase for takeoff. What is this precondition for takeoff? At this stage, Rostow believed that there is a commercialization, the process of managing or running something which is principally for financial gain. Means that individual, they now start to thinking about financial gain. They are now giving importance to the material goods also. So the commercialization concept arises, and also that the society becomes semi-nomadic, means that they try to have a relatively permanent settlement in a particular region, and also they have the large livestock. Although they have the livestock was also kind of more prominent in a traditional society, but in case of the precondition society, its size become larger. Now there are large livestocks, and also that the trade concept arise in case of this in this phase, and also the economy, they are moving towards modernization, and also for the defense of the society, they form a kind of military, means that a kind of force in a form of army form, and also the infrastructure in a developing stage. In case of this traditional society, there was no infrastructure, but in case of the precondition, they are now giving focus to infrastructure. So we can say that infrastructure is in developing phase, and also the political power enhanced due to the economic trade. This is how the precondition for takeoff at this stage the society is. So we can say that the major changes that occur, that they give more importance to material goods. Apart from the spiritual life, they also give priority to the material goods also. So they involve in a commercialization. Also they enhance political powers, means they divide the political dynamics. So it means that there is now a concept of leader and followers. Now the third stage is the takeoff stage. It was a preparatory stage, now the takeoff stage, which is the third stage in a Rostow stages of economic development. At this stage, the society is now more urbanized. There is now industrialization. There is now growth of manufacturing. There is high level of economic development, that is about 10%. And there is also infrastructure which get developed, and also the agriculture production get enhanced due to the technological advancement. So at takeoff stage, what happened, that there is now economic growth. There is mostly individualism, that people, they are now more self-centered as compared to more collectivist as they were in the traditional stage, and also they try to generate more and more profit in trading. This is how the society become in a takeoff stage. Then the fourth stage is the drive to maturity. That is the fourth stage. In this stage, the society become more diversified. There is now diversification of sources. Trade increase. There is now strong political hold. And also the specialization occur. Innovations occur. Investment enhance. Investment then leads to more than 10%. There is now diversity in use of every resource. So there is now more innovation, more diversification of resources. So society has become more pluralistic. So it means the society has become more mature. So we can say that in case of the maturity, what are the major changes? That society become more specialized. They now tend to, adopt more and more new ideas and innovations, and they are also, as the new ideas are emerging, so it will also lead to a kind of social movements. There are now concepts of human rights, women rights. So now there will be a different kinds of social movements depending on the type of ideology that prevail in society. The last stage which Rostow highlighted is the stage which he called age of mass consumption. This is the society, age of mass consumption. This is a society which is highly sophisticated society, which is of high production, high consumption. There is a fast transportation of food. There is global connections, and also it is something related. The whole world become capitalized. Is a global capitalism. There is high competition in a global economy. Every society tend to have better better technology so they can compete in a capitalist economy. This is how the major changes occur, that the society become more consumable, the global connections gets more enhanced, and also the competition become more intense. So this is how the society it passed through these 5 stages, and this is the kind of pathway which was depicted by this Rostow. And according to Rostow, that every society has to pass through these stages if they want to have a kind of more progressive end. These Rostow stages was also criticized for the ethnocentric belief, because when we give a kind of pathway that every society has to pass through these stages, means that we are giving more importance to the progressive pathway which was adopted by the European society, because it's mostly the pathway according to a European society. So it means that we are giving more superiority or more importance to their culture, and we are just restricting the other ways of progress, and we are just translating it into a one path solution. This is not always the case in every society, that they have to pass through all these stages. Okay, so what is the role of the rich nations in all this capitalist economy? According to a modernist thinker, role of rich nation is something beneficial for society as a whole. That's why this theory, as it is more structure functionalist, so they give more importance to the role of the rich nation, and they highlight the beneficial consequences of it. So what the modernist thinkers believe, that the rich nations, they play their positive role in the globe. What is their role? That the high income countries, they play 4 important roles in a global economic development. What are these roles? First, that they control population around the globe. How the rich nations, they control population around the globe? According to a modernist thinker, rich nations, they control population growth by exporting birth control technology, by promoting its use through advertisement. This is how the rich nations play their role in controlling population of globe as a whole. And the second important role is that it increases food production, because they export the high-tech farming methods to poor nations to increase agriculture yields, and also they export the new hybrid seeds. They also give awareness about the modern irrigation methods. They also make use of the chemical fertilizers, and also export the pesticides for insect control, which according to a modernist thinker was a reason that the Green Revolution occurred. Means that if the rich nation, they did not perform their function well, the Green Revolution might not occur. This is what the modernist thinker believe, that most of their technological advancement in the field of agriculture, it has actually caused Green Revolution. And the third role which has been highlighted, that they provide foreign aid to the poor countries. It shifts the labor force from farming to skilled industries and also the service jobs. So they provide a kind of investment capital. They build irrigation projects, power plants and factories. They build corporations, and which help them with providing jobs. So this is a kind of, the corporations in a poor countries actually provide them jobs and also help them in foreign aid. And the fourth is that it introduced industrial technology, and by introducing industrial technology, what they do, that they actually shift the labor from the industrial and from the farming job to the more skillful industrial and the services jobs. And this is how it boosts the economy of the poor nations. So this is how the modernist thinker believed that the role of the rich nations is promoting the economy of the poor nations, and is helping the world to get out of the global poverty, and also it is something beneficial for the whole world as a whole. Okay, now criticism to a modernization theory. The modernization theory has been criticized by different other sociologists. What the critics believe that the corporations in low-income countries, they are like sweatshops. Okay, the corporations, which mostly the modernist thinker believe that they actually provide a kind of, it promote the foreign aid in a poor countries. According to our critics, it is actually exploiting the laborers, because the corporations in a low-income countries, they set their own wage hours. They set their own labor hours, they set their own wages, minimum wages, and they try to take more and more work from the laborers on cheap, on less pay, and that's why they are able to get cheap labor from the poor countries. And also that the critics believe that the modernization theory is a kind of defense of the capitalist countries, because it is depicting a picture of how the capitalism is promoting or is something beneficial for our society. So it is viewed that by the critics mostly view the modernization theory as a kind of defense of the capitalist countries. And also that it ignores international relations of countries. One of the major criticism is also that the modernists think that they actually treat the rich nations and poor nations separately. They do not give importance, or also they do not shed light on international connections, that how the poor nations and the rich nations, they are connected through a global economy, and how the international trade rules, they are actually making the poor nations more poorer, and the rich nations are getting more profit at the expense of the poor nations, because they are not actually giving importance to the trade that is actually happening at the international level. And also it has been criticized for the ethnocentric bias, because it believed that it holds up that the world's most developed countries, they are a kind of standard to measure the progress. We know that most developed countries, they have a high standard of living, but by just generalizing their progress and by claiming that it is the only way through which we have to achieve the progress, and it is the only meaning of progress, that if for example, if a society, what does a progress mean? It is all if we have to look at the developed society, how they act, how they means that it is not only the single way to have more progress in a country. There are many other ways which has been neglected by the modernist thinker. And also there is a kind of victim blaming of the poor countries. As we discussed, the modernization theories, they mostly consider the cultural differences. So means that they are doing a kind of victim blaming, that it is the culture of the poor nation which is actually making them more poorer. And also the other thing that they oversimplify, and also oversimplify means that they give a kind of linear and uniform pathway to modernization that all countries are expected to work, as we discussed in a form of the Rostow 5 stages of economic development. And also it is accused of historical inaccuracy, because the modernist thinker, they are failed to consider the impact of colonialism and also the imperialism. There are also some other external forces like the international trade, the global economic policies, which is actually giving more advantage to rich countries. So modernization theory has been criticized by the other sociologists who actually proposed the dependency theory, and they have been criticized as a whole for not giving more importance to the international connections, and actually by treating the rich and the poor nations as separate worlds, ignoring the ways in which the international relations have been affected all nations. And also it fails to recognize that how the rich nations which benefit the status quo, they often block the path for the development of the poor countries. And also that, some countries, they use up the world's scarce resources and they pollute the natural environment, and they give less opportunity to poor nations to have more progress. So this is how the modernization theory has been criticized. Okay, modernization has also been criticized for neglecting the external forces and focus only on the short-term economic growth. External forces include the international trade, the global economic policies, and the short-term economic growth means that it is, for example, if a poor nation is running a project that is based on the sustainable development, modernization think they do not give importance to such projects. That's why it has been criticized. So this is all what modernization theory means and how was it criticized. Now we will discuss the other theory, which is the dependency theory. Okay, dependency theory is a theory which actually gave more importance to the historical exploitation of the poor nations by the rich countries. So they gave is a model of economic and social development that explain global inequality in terms of the historical exploitation of poor nations by rich ones. And this historical exploitation occurred because industrialization it first began in Great Britain about 1750. And this industrialization then spread around Western Europe, and this Western Europe they were then plowing some of their profit into their powerful fast ships. And then what were they doing with their ships? That they were actually invading the weaker nations, they making colonies out of them. They left behind a controlling force in order to exploit the nation's labor and also the natural resources. So it is how the rich nations, when they first industrialized, they were able to block the pathway for the other nations to be industrialized. They actually colonized them. They were making a kind of economic colonies, exploiting the nation's people and resources for the benefit of the mother country. This is how the modernist thinker believed that global stratification began at the first place. So it followed a social conflict approach, means it viewed the whole world as a kind of battlefield in which the rich nations, they are colonizing the poor nations, they are draining the raw materials from these countries, and they are exploiting these countries. And then the main responsibility of the global poverty lies on the rich nations, because the dependency theory believe that it is the rich nations who actually misuse the labor and the other resources of the poor nations and create this cycle of the global poverty. And the prosperity of the most developed countries came largely at the expense of the less developed countries. It is because that they were actually extracting raw materials from the poor countries, and as these countries were more industrialized, so they were able to make the finalized product, and then they were compelling the poor countries to buy this product at a high price, and they were pushing these countries into an eternal debt. This is how the countries work, the rich countries work. So the dependency theory actually studied this whole process of exploitation of poor nations by the rich ones. So what the dependency theory gave more importance to, that is the neo-colonialism, which they believe that is the heart of the capitalist world economy. What is colonialism? Colonialism, it has been defined as a process by which one nation they take over another nation, usually for the purpose of exploiting its labor and the natural resources. This is what colonialization means. Neo-colonialism means that the colonization process has been modified. Means that now what usually happened that the economic and the political dominance of the least industrialized nations by the most industrialized nation is termed as the neo-colonialism. It is that the powerful nations, the most industrialized nations, they are owning a large debt and falling behind a payment puts us at the mercy of the creditors. So it is with our neo-colonialism. And also the most industrialized nations, they turn to the international market as a way of controlling the least industrialized nations. So what the rich countries do, that they mostly sell their weapons, they owe money to the poor countries on the rate of the large interest. They block their way, and the revenue which they generated in the poor nation, they mostly spend in repaying their debt rather than to spend that money on the development of their own country. And in that way, they actually block their pathway of progress. This is how the dependency theory view the whole process of the global poverty. Okay, so one of the most notable theory in case of the dependency theory is the Wallerstein world system theory, which we will discuss in this lecture. Okay, what is the Wallerstein world system theory? According to this theory, industrialization leads to four groups of nations, which he called as the core nations, semi-periphery nations, periphery nations, and also the external area. This is how Wallerstein believed that the world system, the industrialization actually leads to of these four groups of nations. The whole world has been stratified into these four groups. So what are the core nations? Core nations were those nations which industrialized first, and it include most of the Britain, France, Holland, and later Germany. Colonialism enriched this core by funneling raw material from around the world to Western Europe, where they fueled industrial revolution. And the second group was of the semi-periphery. They were considered located around the Mediterranean, and the economies of these nations had become stagnant because they were grew dependent on trade with the core nations. So when the core nations, they cut off their relation with the semi-peripheral, their economy becomes stagnant, so they are more dependent on the core nations. And third country were of the periphery. They are most of the countries which are of the low income nations, they were included in this. They were also called as the fringe nations. Fringe means on the side or on the edge, or those nations who have been excluded, who are on the sideline. So the fringe nations, they were those who were mostly of the Eastern European countries were included in these periphery nations. What they were doing, that they were selling their crops. They were selling their crops to the core nations, and in return, what the core nations were doing, as they were having the more industry, so they were actually processing their raw materials. Semi-peripheral nations were acting as a bridge between the core nations and the periphery nations. So the core nations were then making the finalized product, and they were compelling the periphery nations, the poor nations, to buy their product at a higher price, and in that way they were actually trapping them into eternal debt. Okay, so periphery nations were of the most poor nations. They were exporting rich ones by providing the inexpensive labor and also a vast market for industrial product. And the external area, which was considered as a fourth group, they were mostly include most of the Africa and Asia, and these nations were left out of the development of the capitalism altogether. They were the external area. They were not in the competition of the capitalism. This is how the Wallerstein believed that industrialization led to a classification of these nations into these four groups. Okay, Wallerstein world economy. According to Wallerstein, there are three factors that are responsible for the dependency of the poor nations on the rich nations in global economy. Why poor nations are dependent on rich nations? Wallerstein gave explanation of it, and he identified three factors for this. Okay, what are these three factors? He believed that the first factor is because of the narrow and export-oriented economy. Poor nations produce only a few crops to export to rich nations. That is in the form of for example, the Latin America that was only producing coffee and fruit. Nigeria was only producing oil. Philippines was producing hardwoods. Malaysia was producing palm oil, and these were the few products which they were producing, and the multinational corporations, they purchased it cheaply and then transport it to the core nations, where they were then processed into a final product. And the second factor was that lack of industrial capacity. Without industrial revolution, poor society, they were facing a double bind. They were relying on the mercy of the rich nations because of the two reasons. First, that they were actually relying on the rich nations to buy inexpensive raw material for them, and also that they must then try to buy the product from a rich nations at the high price, because they were unable to make their own raw materials into finishable or into a processed product because they were lacking industrial revolution. So the Green Revolution in agriculture also worked like this, according to Wallerstein. Means that Green Revolution was a kind of trap. And the third thing is the foreign debt. Means that the unequal trade patterns have actually plunged poor countries into debt. This is how Wallerstein believed that the whole poor world is actually dependent on the rich world. Okay, there are some major criticisms that have been drawn to the dependency theory. That is that first is it is unjustified to blame rich nations for a global poverty. Most of the thinkers believe that it is unjustified because there are also some other reasons. For example, it is wrong to believe to blame rich nations for global poverty because many of the world's poorest countries, for example Ethiopia, they have little contact with the rich nations. And the second thing, that is simplistic to study only one factor. The dependency theorists have only studied the capitalist market system. There is also some other factors. For example, if some countries they have a military dictatorship, so that's why they are poor. There are also some other countries who have some kind of culture. There's a hardcore Islamic culture, or we can say some other culture, they are strict to the traditional ideas. It might be one of the reasons that they are actually stuck in the poverty. So it means that it is the dependency theory to give a very simplistic picture of the whole global poverty. And then it is unjustified to say that global trades always make rich nations richer and poor nations poorer, because the international trade is also profiting poor nations at the same time. Means that the poor nations, they are getting profit from the multinational corporations in the form of the foreign aids. So it is not something that we have to say that it is always the rich nation which is getting profit. Poor nations are also getting benefit from it. Okay, and also that the dependency theory is offering only vague solution to a global poverty. For example, if we go by the logic of the dependency theory, that it is actually the exploitative link which actually make them more suppressed. If we go by this logic, it means that the poor nation has to cut off all the relation with the rich nations. It is not something possible. So what is the solution of the global poverty? The dependency theory doesn't give any kind of clear solution to how to deal with the global poverty. Okay, so at the last we will discuss what we have studied in this lecture. We will just conclude that first, that the modernization theory, which theoretical approach is applied. In case of the modernization theory, the approach is the structure function, because it actually portrays the role of the rich nations is more positive for the society, while the dependency theory is more focused on a social conflict approach that view the whole world as a battlefield and believe that the rich nation has been the poor nation has been exploited by the rich nations. How did the global poverty come about? According to modernization thinker, the whole world was poor until some countries they become industrialized, and which allow mass production, and they created affluence, that is the accumulation of wealth. But on the other hand, the dependency theory believed that is actually the colonialism that move wealth from some countries to others, making some countries poor as it makes some others nations richer. So it means that dependency theory gave more importance to the colonialism, neocolonialism, imperialism, and the modernization theory believed that this is because of the technological race, that some countries they lag behind and some countries lead, and there is also some kind of cultural differences. What are the main causes of the global poverty? According to modernization thinker, the traditional culture and the lack of productive technology. But on the other hand, the dependency theory believed that this is because of the neocolonialism, the operation of the multinational corporations, the global capitalist economy. Okay, are rich nations part of the problem or part of the solution? How the modernization and the dependency theory view the role of the rich nations? Modernization theorists believe that rich nations are part of solution, means that they are contributing well for our society. If they are doing well for our society, they are actually helping the poor nation to have more progress. So they are contributing new technology in the form of, as we discussed, in the form of birth control pills, in the form of the pesticides. So it advanced schooling and foreign aid. And the dependency theorists believe that rich nations are actually creating problem more and more severe. They are part of the problem. They are making poor countries economically dependent and in debt. They are selling their weapons. They are colonizing them, and they are actually blocking their path to have more industrialization by colonialism, by exploiting their labor, by exploiting their resources. So this is how the modernization theory and the dependency theory believe about the origin of the social stratification, about the global poverty. So this was all about the global stratification, its definition, examples, and its theories. So this was the end of our lecture. Thank you so much for watching. Leave your questions in a comment section below, and like, share, and subscribe our channel for latest lectures. Thank you.